So one of the things I want to share with you now, which is also publishable, so your APG person can give this to you if you're interested. This was a study of 780 something facility managers and A&D professionals. And the facility managers are people that are on the client site. The A&D folks that were surveyed are A&D professionals that support a client. So they're part of an A&D firm, okay? There was a global study, which we're happy to provide you. I'm focused right now just on the US results for you. So it was sort of a 4-page document with lots and lots of data. I'm not going to go through all of that with you. If you are interested in it, just make note of it, and your APG person or Mark or somebody can provide that to you. I'm just going to highlight things from the survey that I think are very, very important for us today in our conversation. And I've circled them here for you. So, and my apologies if we can't see this from the back here, so I'll sort of read this. The findings, FM stands for facility managers. This also includes real estate professionals, and A&D is of course your architecture and design individuals, okay? So what we found in terms of the top drivers for the space for FM, facility managers, and A&D people, these were the top 3. And out of these top 3, really, it's not 6 different things, it tends to be 4, were quite compelling for both sides of the house. For facilities managers, their top drivers were based on growth, cost effectiveness, and continuous improvement or efficiency, their words, not ours. From the A&D standpoint, they believed in those same things, but then also added attraction and retention. That was another sort of driver for them. So if you think about what are the hot button drivers for an organization, I would look at it as these particular 4. So either we can agree with that if we're customers, or if there are other things that begin to resonate. But these tend to be those top 4 issues. So growth, cost effectiveness, continuous improvement, and then of course attraction and retention, which I find attraction and retention quite compelling. Yes, sir?
How do you define cost effectiveness? Is that in hard cost or facility cost?
Facilities cost. Facilities cost. Not as much labor, but because these are facility and real estate folks, it's based around the drivers of the physical space.
So is it density, sort of utilization that drives that? I mean, more people, more productive in a smaller space?
In the real estate, yes. And what was also found from this is that many organizations are moving into these smaller locations, but they also have a challenge with growth. And so how do you sort of meet the two as you're moving into a smaller space, but then sort of meet the needs of a growth situation as their top issue for them? Good. So the question was how are the numbers around continuous improvement or cost effectiveness, I'm sorry, how is that based on? And it's based on the real estate conversation. Okay. Not necessarily for the cost of employee. Now, the other thing that I find quite interesting from this particular portion of the research document is that facility managers and A&D folks agreed on the most important office design considerations, but A&D felt more strongly about them. So they both are in support of the idea of design considerations that reflect collaboration and new forms of group work. Collaboration and new forms of group work and attraction of top talent. But what we find throughout the study is that A&D people are much farther along in the process. Now, as an IFMA member, I feel I can say this. In facilities, we are generally focused on what just happened 5 minutes ago, right? The HVAC system went out. You know, there's a leak somewhere. You know, something's going on. And so we're having to deal with what just happened. Is that a fair assessment from facility people in the room or real estate people? So we're always dealing with what just happened. Whereas the design folks, the A&D people, are focused on what's happening next, right? So when we see these numbers, it may not be as compelling for facility manager or real estate people, but just understand the idea of where I believe individuals are coming from in the discussion, right? There's a pipe that broke, and so we have to figure out what to do about that. So that's sort of what we're thinking about. One of the things that I also found quite interesting in the research is that facility managers and A&D professionals have different projections on the percentage of space dedicated to support collaboration 3 years from now. So A&D people feel like it's quite compelling, whereas facility managers think that honestly, the majority of them think that there won't be any change whatsoever in collaboration. So I'll show you our data is totally opposite that in terms of what's happening in terms of collaboration. But in building this case, I'm just sort of showing you where you may see resistance in your discussions. People that are critically on board with this conversation are HR professionals. So if you can get someone in HR to have a discussion about the space, I say bring them to every meeting, because they totally know all of this, they are on board with this, and they want everybody to sort of hear this, and nobody is listening because they think that they're their only goal is to focus on that individual, but they're really concerned about the connection of space, which I have another slide that I can talk to as well. So I'm just showing this so that we understand the concerns that your colleagues may be faced with and how to have that conversation with them, okay? And then you want to bring someone from A&D with you in the room because, they're already on board with all of this, right? So the other thing that I wanted to mention here, 2 points. One is around employee engagement, again, because that's what I like talking about, and how this is addressed. So these tend to be the top 5 issues in terms of how employees' engagement is addressed in the physical space. So I want to point out the top 2 issues. A&D and facility managers both believe that creating a sense of community and belonging is important. That's why that book, Well-Being by Tom Rath, I think is critical for us to sort of understand. Because it's based, that idea of community and belonging is essential to Rath's work. The other part here, helping people understand strategy, culture, and brand, I love that. That's sort of my background. So I'm very jazzed and pumped up about this particular area. But the idea here is that another advocate in having this conversation around the space could be marketing leaders, because the marketing professionals at the organization are very much on board with the idea of brand and strategy and developing that sort of idea. So I would say, in my opinion, and then culture are your HR people. So in terms of advocates, if we're looking for advocates at the customer site, I think that those marketing professionals and HR professionals are people that we may not visit with quite often, but I would say they're people that we should. Thoughts, comments, agreements, disagreement, malarkey, anything about that? No? Okay. So the other point that I just want to make from this particular slide here is the idea of generations in the workforce. There's arguments that go back and forth and whether or not we're supporting generations of workers and what that sort of means. Both your facility managers and your A&D professionals believe that there are considerations that are given to generational workers, and these are the types of things that they're talking about. The ability to work from anywhere, the type of amenities that are provided. You can see you have 45% of agreement with facility managers, but 69% of agreement with A&D professionals. Ideas of open plan, lots of access to software and technology. So those are the types of things that we see that generally support these generations of folks in the workplace. So just be aware if we're having challenges at our client site that other organizations find it compelling and are supporting various generations in the workforce. So that begins to build your case. One of the other things that I think is quite interesting in terms of virtual collaboration or technology here is that, and this is for facility managers only, we're asked this particular question, 31% provide both cloud storage and social networks. So this whole idea of social networks not being integrated into the workplace is not, of course, for the majority it may not be happening, but it is on the rise. So this is the idea of 31%. So when we talk about security in terms of technology and how many organizations may feel very uncomfortable about either cloud-based storage. Cloud-based storage is just a fancy word for a server. We know that, right? The other thing is the idea of social networks. We find many organizations are moving to this. So it's now almost at a third are supporting this technology. So So I just wanted to show that. The other part here that I think is quite interesting are mobile app technology that's being provided by clients at 19%. So the thought process here that organizations may not be moving fast enough on board to provide mobile technology, mobile app support, it's happening. The train is moving, and either organizations are going to support it or they're not going to be a part of what's happening in the future. So I show this just to kind of concern ourselves in where we are if we're the customer and understand where other organizations are going. So it's happening, and I think that it's quite compelling for us. Okay? So that's it in terms of the data around facility managers and A&D professionals. This next part, before we get into the data of space utilization, is around future thinking, the future of work based on 2018. Any comments or questions so far while we're at this sort of break? Yes, sir.
Regarding the data and the use of the data, one of the things that I guess is an issue for many in the government comment is change management from the leadership team. So it's one thing that we're all drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will, about the effectiveness. But at the end of the day, probably every organization, there's some stodgy number crunching, with respect
to the stodgy number crunchers, right, in the room. No disrespect to them, right?
They're squeaking a little bit, they get the work done, and there's zero cost.
Right.
And then how do you apply this in a methodology from a change management standpoint to convince executive leadership that these are wise investments? Because candidly, I'm a little skeptical sometimes with the data that comes out of these because it's diluted by all the other improvements you're trying to make. So how do you hang your hat on, I gave a better chair and office configuration to an individual, therefore I got an extra 3% productivity out of it, versus I also implemented a new system and gave them a new computer, or whatever the case may be, that did that. So those are the kind of skeptical questions you get from leadership. Hey, I want to spend $4 million recuperating a particular area, or whatever the case may be. So I'd like to understand how the data supports convincing that audience, people that aren't eager to think.
Okay, so Robert's question around the process of change management and supporting utilizing data so that we can get stodgy folks on board with the discussion. So I hope that Robert will stick with us through the rest of the presentation, because the latter half is all about that in terms of the change management process. I get that on an hourly basis, quite honestly. I'm typically around stodgy people in a room, and so the idea, because one advocate has invited me to be in a room of stodgy people, and this generally happens. So, based out of Dallas, I have lots of oil and gas sort of experience where folks are not wanting to even have this discussion, and it's the idea of kind of changing hearts and minds in all of this, and understanding the harvesting and reinvesting. So when we get into seeing those numbers, you'll then be able to say, okay, well, I have X millions of dollars. What could I do with that as an organization? And again, I'm not saying that they need to buy more tables and chairs. I'm saying that they need to do something that's built on a compelling case for their business drivers. So once we show them the numbers, and you, specifically Robert, then I think that we can kind of have that conversation as well. So if it's okay, I'll kind of walk through that with you in this process, okay?